Hi. I think we are live. Welcome to this Google Hangout. I'm here with my friend and colleague Derek Mowbray. I'm Alan Bradshaw. I'm a business psychologist. I do quite a lot of work in the NHS, and I'm here to chat around about some of the issues around tackling stress in the NHS. It's a huge problem, um, affecting thousands and thousands of people, and we both want to do something about it. It's a really important thing. Derek, do you want to briefly introduce yourself?
Well, hello, Alan.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Yes, well, I'm a psychologist too, as you know. I'm an organisation health psychologist, and I specialise in the primary prevention of stress. So, for those of you out there who are already stressed, I'm sorry, I'm not particularly interested. I am, however, interested in preventing you from experiencing stress in the first place. And I'm really interested in the subject because stress has a massive negative impact upon the way in which we can behave and perform, and that's my interest. I have had a previous life. I have run large organizations myself, and I am responsible for a few companies at the moment. So I practice what I preach, and the material that I develop and apply is known to have an impact. So I'm not just an academic who's advising people. I'm actually a practicing academic, if you like, and I have done everything that I'm talking about.
And you used to, you had a previous life inside the NHS as well, didn't you, Derek?
I did indeed, and I reached quite a high-level position, running three different types of organisation, including a London teaching hospital, and also the Management Advisory Service when it was first set up. It was set up to advise the health service how to improve the delivery of healthcare. So I've got a history of looking at the health service in a variety of different ways, as well as running it, running
Okay.
part of it anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's great, and I know you've been very active, as have I, working with a large number of NHS clients. So we both experienced, some of the issues. The first thing I wanted to just get your thoughts on, Derek, was about the scale of the problem. I certainly feel, and seems to be a lot of data about that there is a really big problem. What are your thoughts on the scale of the problem of stress in the NHS?
Well, there have been a number of surveys, and although surveys probably are quite difficult to genuinely assess the level of stress, because stress has got so many interpretations, but I would say about between 30 to 40% of the workforce at any one time appear to be suffering from degrees of stress. That's what the surveys tend to indicate. But there's a long history of stressful events and so on coming out of the staff surveys over many years, where there have been indications of situations which would give rise to stress. But I think we've got to be careful about what we mean when we talk about stress, because stress is at the wrong end of a continuum, which includes pressure and tension, both of which are stimulants and can stimulate us to concentrate and focus attention on the tasks that we're expected to perform. And indeed, it does us some good to be under degrees of pressure, so long as we retain control. If we lose control, then we deteriorate down into degrees of strain, and strain is when we start thinking about the causes of our stressful sensations.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of a lot of stuff in the news, hasn't there, recently about the strain on NHS services. I mean, particularly with regards accident and emergency, hasn't there? I mean, that's been a hot issue recently, and there certainly is, both anecdotal and sort of research evidence to suggest that that the service is under strain and it's having an impact on people, isn't it?
Oh, very much so. I mean, there are a lot of organisations, including the NHS, are under a lot of strain at the moment with excess demand for what might appear to be a limited supply of people capable of delivering services to that demand. And at some point it becomes just a mathematical problem. If you haven't got the resources to deal with the demand, then of course no amount of personal resilience and positive attitudes on the part of staff will actually cope with that excess demand, because just by pure mathematics there's too much to deal with.
Sure,
And if that becomes a sort of relentless process, which it appears to be, then of course you are in serious risk of serious negative impact on services, safety, and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, how would you describe the impact? I mean, obviously there's there's both an organisational impact, isn't there, but also, there's a potentially a very serious impact on people, isn't there?
Well, individually, of course, you feel rotten, and you're not in control of yourself mentally. And as soon as that begins to happen, then you start to make mistakes. You start duplicating effort. You start repeating things, and you try to create shortcuts for complicated activities. And if the shortcuts work the first time, you do them a second time, but ultimately they'll fail, and situations then become really grim. You feel unwell. You don't feel in control of yourself. In some ways, some people will almost have the sensation of looking at themselves from a distance, and wondering who they are. I mean, it's a horrible situation.
I suppose one of the most worrying things is in terms of decision making, isn't it? Because we rely on people. I mean, the NHS is fantastic when we are ourselves, really unwell, and we're relying on people to make the best possible decisions about our health and our care, aren't we?
We are, and almost as important is that we actually rely on the staff in the NHS giving of themselves, their friendliness, their reassurance, their humanity. Certainly the last time I had to go in a hospital because of being run over by a herd of cows, for example, this was about 3 years ago, everybody...
I shouldn't laugh, that sounds very serious.
Well, as you know, it turned out to be really quite serious.
It was serious, yeah.
Yes, but the staff from the ambulance crew outside of accident emergency to everybody inside, it was their humanity, their care, their interest. So this, and the fact that everybody looked after the injury, obviously was extremely important. But what I'm saying is that they were giving of themselves.
Yes.
And being interested in us as victims of an event. And that is just as important in many ways as the technical aspects of sorting out our problems.
Sure. I mean, it never ceases to amaze me that people in the NHS, they just do a fantastic job of looking after us.
They do.
The vast majority of the time. Thinking about some of the issues around stress in the NHS, what do you think is causing these problems? Why have they got worse? And what's your thoughts on that, Derek, in terms of why things have deteriorated in terms of stress levels?
Well, I think there are a number of fundamental problems to be addressed. I mean, it's interesting that Francis is producing his whistleblowing report today. I haven't had a chance of looking at that yet, but one of the symptoms of a poor culture is that whistleblowing has become an industry.
Sure.
and that is a negative sign in the first place. But I think there is a fundamental problem that the NHS is one of the most complex organisations to run in the world, and yet it's run by amateurs. We've got politicians who think they know how to do it, and we've got civil servants, some of whom are absolutely terrific. And of course, we've got the chief executive now who's got a brilliant CV in terms of running things. But the overall cultural environment is one of, well, anyone can have a go at running the NHS. And over the last 25, 30 years or thereabouts, people have been playing around with what I call the background, the organisation, the way in which it's actually structured, the internal market and everything else, rather than focusing on the foreground, which is the actual interplay between the patient and the service itself. So what we've had is placing greater significance into structures and so on, compared to what we should be doing, which is placing a huge emphasis on people.
Sure.
And on the way
I suppose as well, yeah, I mean, I suppose as well, you know, as we touched on earlier on, objectively, the demands have increased. You know, the population's increased, the pressures have increased, the number of people going into hospitals has increased. So, you know, related to all that those organizational issues, the demands and the intensity of the work has increased, hasn't it?
Yes, it has, but that's another case in point. I remember in the 1970s, the balance of care model produced the result that by about this time, 2015 to 2020, the whole of the NHS budget would be consumed by people my age and older. And no one really has done anything about it. And that is an indication of the sort of amateur sort of activity that takes place about the NHS. There are a huge number of hugely talented, very capable people of all sorts, scientists right the way through to psychologists and so on. And obviously the vast majority of those people are nurses. And they are in the foreground, and their job is to look after us as people, whilst everybody else sort of delves in and does the specialist stuff.
Yeah.
And well, I think we've lost a bit sight of that in many ways, and we need to sort of come back with an NHS that is actually run really professionally well.
Sure. Thinking about, you know, I know it's a big topic, but just want to get your views on, you know, some of the things that we can do about, you know, some of the, I mean, we both want to do something. I mean, we're both motivated because of our experience to do something. So interested to get your views on that, and just say something about something you developed a few years ago, Derek, which was really, I thought, excellent, which was you developed something called a manager's code, didn't you, for the NHS?
Yes. This really came about because of the number of staff surveys showing poor management interaction with staff, basically, and also it coincided with a very paucity of candidates for chief executive roles, and it was occurring to me that if the chief executive role was actually a species, it would become extinct, because the number of people wanting to become chief executive was really very, very small, whereas the pool is potentially very large. So there was something clearly going wrong, and I wanted to do something to bring about a cultural change, if you like. And so I managed to persuade a number of people from the major organizations, including the civil service, to come together to consider creating a code, and not a policing code, but a code which would start to change the behaviors of people within the NHS as a whole. and I did the work behind the code, which is based on behaviours which are necessary in order to produce ultimately trust, commitment, motivation, kinship, and social engagement, all of which are the antidotes to stress. And
One of the, that's, I mean, I probably should say at this point, I mean, I think one of my major motivations in, setting up this project around tackling stress in the NHS is really to raise awareness of that code, because I don't think people, a lot of people in the, including leadership and managers in the NHS, are really enough aware of that code.
no, and in a way, it was unfortunate once it was produced. It was launched by Dame Carol Black in January 2012 through the Institute of Healthcare Management, who had revised it somewhat in order to be suitable for them. But then in the whole process, certain events took place which meant that unfortunately we couldn't capitalize on the development of the code itself. There were lots of conversations taking place within the civil service, for example, about the need for accreditation of managers, whether there should be an inspectorate type code, whether a code should be part of the terms and conditions and part of the contract of managers, and so on. And I wasn't really interested in that, because I was interested much more in trying to persuade people to change their behavior, because I wanted a cultural change, not to pursue the inspectorate and the bad boy approach to things, which I thought was causing all the problems.
Yeah, I mean, these certainly when I'm talking with managers in particular, these behaviors are so important, aren't they? I mean, they're the foundation of how we get on with other people and how we manage other people. So those behaviours are so important, aren't they?
They are, and since I produced the Manager's Code, I've also developed the concept of psychological responsibility, which is based on our need to look after our own psychological well-being, as well as doing no harm to other people. And it's also based on the same behaviours as the Manager's Code. The principal behaviour, of course, is being attentive to other people. If I'm attentive to you, for example, Alan, as I am in this interview, it's almost impossible for you not to reciprocate.
Of course.
Be attentive back. And it's although it requires quite a lot of effort to be genuinely attentive to other people, it is the start of proper behaviour towards each other.
Yeah.
So psychological responsibility and the Manager's Code has attentiveness as its principal behaviour.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's just everything really starts from there, doesn't it? You know, if I'm attending to you and you're attending to me, we're going to have a much better interaction. And I suppose it's going to be a key to good patient experience, care, and staff well-being, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Attentiveness is really critical, and
Yeah.
it requires concentration, and it requires genuine interest in the other person.
I suppose as well that when people are get genuinely stressed, then that's one of the things that can really go first, isn't it? Is their attentiveness, because they're preoccupied by what's causing them stress.
They are, and you become really self-interested. So
Sure.
you don't give of yourself in quite the same way. You start looking internally and start protecting yourself because you need to survive.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. Attentiveness is the first thing that goes.
Yeah.
And as soon as that goes, then we default, unfortunately, back to being quite brusque.
Yeah.
And that causes a lot of difficulties.
And I suppose that's one of the things that we've chatted a lot about this in the past, and certainly, I'm looking forward to being sort of working with you on this about developing appropriate training and development that focus on exactly these kinds of behaviours.
Yes, yes. I mean, I think that we need to resurrect the manager's code.
Yeah.
And I think I need to, as you know, I've prepared and produced a number of guides to various aspects of psychological health and well-being and performance. And I think I need to perhaps develop a guide to the manager's code as one of the series in order to help with the training and development of managers. But it is interesting that the amount of training of managers in behaviours in terms of managing people is really quite slim.
Yeah.
And we need to try and tackle the issue from that point of view.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's certainly something. I think that's going to be one of the key themes going forward about, and certainly one of my main motivations is to raise awareness both of the code and these behaviours. Great,
good.
I mean, we've covered a sort of fair bit of ground there, Derek. I want to say something, a little bit more about what we're doing, what we're planning around this project, this tackling stress in the NHS. First of all, I mean, obviously, I want to raise awareness of this issue. I've set up Facebook and Google pages, and I think I'll be doing quite a bit on LinkedIn too. We're organising some events which Derek will be involved in, and we've already mentioned some training, also some tools and resources. We want to make people aware of those, where they can get them and download them and use them. So there's a whole lot of things going on, and we're both very motivated to do something about the issue of stress in the NHS. Derek, do you have anything more you want to say about sort of what we've got planned and what you hope to achieve on the back of this project?
Well, I think this is such an important project. Stress is probably the biggest inhibitor to performance.
Sure.
And there's no real reason why organisations shouldn't be fabulous places to work, where people get out of bed, run to work, because it's such a fantastic place to be. And that means that they are stress-free, that people are able to go about their work, fulfill their own ambitions and so on, and produce really top-notch performance and care for patients. And I think that's hugely exciting.
Yeah, I think that's great. And what we're not saying that it's we want to get rid of pressure or challenge, because that's what makes being in the health service such a great thing. People want the pressure and the challenge, and the fascinating things that people do there. So it's not about removing that. It's about sort of dealing with some of these these stressors that are causing problems.
Yes, it's the removal of strain and stress. No, I agree. I often advise people and organisations that effectively, to produce high performance, one needs to be able to concentrate on what you do. Yeah. And so to be able to concentrate requires you to be in a situation where you are under pressure for periods of time, so long as you keep control of it. So try and construct 50 minutes in the hour when you are actually under pressure, but you know that after 50 minutes you can have a stop and do something else, and then start again for another 50 minutes. That sort of thing will raise people's performance enormously. Okay.
Yeah, well, that's, great. Well, we've been chatting for quite a while, Derek, so I probably ought to bring this this conversation to a close, but just want to say thanks very much for joining in with this this hangout. Hopefully the technology works and we've recorded ourselves okay. So thanks again, Derek, and speak to you soon.
Okay, many thanks, Alan. Good luck.
Bye-bye.
Bye.